Hey everyone, I'm Blessed Beats with Soundation. In this video, I'm going to show you how to transform a mix from sounding like this into something much better sounding like this. All by focusing on volume levels. I'll also be sharing some techniques for achieving clean loudness without introducing clipping distortion. Let's get started. This is a beat made in Soundation with samples from the sound library, and all the volume levels are set to 0 decibels. As you could hear before, it sounds awful. But it's not because of the sounds themselves, it's because the volume levels haven't been balanced yet. Setting the volume levels is the most fundamental part of mixing. You want the most important sounds to stand out and be louder than the rest, but at the same time, they can't be so loud that they sound disconnected from the rest of the mix. And other sounds are better to just push back in the background. It's all about finding a good balance. Let's start by talking about how loud the levels should be. I know it's tempting to crank the volume up on everything and make it super loud, but this will only hurt your mix because of clipping. Clipping is when a signal is so loud that it goes above 0 decibels. If I press play, you can see the volume meters on the channels. This shows you how loud each sound is at a particular moment. If you look at the volume meter of this channel, you can see that it peaks at 0 decibels. You can see the loudest peak with this value here. This value should not be confused with the value the fader is set to. The fader volume simply allows you to make the channel louder or quieter. So when checking how loud something is, check this value, not this value. They just both happen to be 0 decibels, but you can see down here that the volume meter peaks at -18 decibels, but the fader is still set to 0 decibels. If I increase the volume, you can see the peak going higher and higher. When it goes above 0 decibels, you can see the volume meter turning red. This means it's clipping and it's introducing some digital distortion. It's easy to think that as long as it's 0 or under, it should be good and still nice and loud. And that is true if it's only one channel, but all channels will add to the total volume of the mix, which you can see on the master output over here. So all channels will be summed up to the master output, and what's on the master is basically what you hear when you export your song to an audio file. No channel is clipping by itself now, but as you can see, it's already in the red and clipping on the master. But you don't see any values. To see that, you can click on this icon and then the master channel will become visible. And now we can see exactly how loud it is. It's clipping by almost 7 decibels above 0. And it sounds pretty terrible, right? A good rule of thumb is to not mix things louder than -6 decibels. This is called leaving headroom, and it makes sure your mix doesn't get distorted. If the volume meter is green, then you're in the clear. If it's yellow, you're in the danger zone. And if it's red, you're in a disaster zone. On the master channel, it's best not to let it peak above -3 decibels. Our brains think that louder sounds better, but it's important to remind ourselves that it's only louder and maybe worse sounding. So we'll make this mix a lot quieter, but don't worry, we'll be making it louder later on. I'll start by bringing all the volume faders down. And you can click on the max peak values to reset them. Then I'll bring up the volume of the channels one by one, starting with the core instruments to get a good bass. You can, for example, start with a kick. This will probably be the loudest element of the song, so I'll bring it up so it peaks just under -6 decibels. -7 should be fine. Then I'll bring up the snare and make it sound balanced together with a kick. Then I'll bring up the 808 bass and make that fit together with a kick and the snare. Then maybe bring up the chords. Mixing like this makes it easier to balance the levels because you only have to focus on one new sound at a time and make sure it sits well among the other sounds. I'll do the rest off screen real quick. Okay, I finished setting up the levels and this is what it sounds like. If you're not sure if something's at a good volume, a good trick is to move it up and down in 3 decibel increments, because 3 decibels is enough of a change that you can hear it, but it's not a super drastic change. Let's say I'm unsure about the level of this hi-hat and clap loop. I'll grab the fader and move it up by 3 decibels over and over until it sounds too loud. Alright, so I would say that -7 decibels is clearly too loud. Now I'll move it down by 3 decibels until it sounds too quiet. I would say -19 decibels is too quiet. Doing this will make you more aware of the level and where it should be, and it will usually be about in the middle of too loud and too quiet. Let's place it in the middle of -7 and -19 decibels, so around -13 decibels. I think this volume sounds pretty good. Just know that there's no right and wrong. It's all subjective and it differs a lot from genre to genre. In a techno track, for example, the kick might be the most important element and therefore very loud. In a pop song, the vocals might be the most important and loudest element. In a rock song, the guitars, etc. Another good trick if you're unsure about the balance of your mix is to use reference tracks. This is when you pick a song that you like and compare it to your mix. Just pick a song that's in the same style as yours and listen back and forth between the two. Make sure the mixes are at a similar volume and listen for how loud the different elements are. And then you can adjust your mix to be more similar to the reference. When you're balancing your volume levels, you may notice that an element is too loud in some parts and too quiet in other parts. This can make it hard to set the levels at a good spot without compromising. Your problem then is that it's too dynamic. In other words, the difference between the peaks and the valleys of the sound is too big. This could be both at a macro level, as in maybe your vocals are loud in the verse but too quiet in the chorus, or on a micro level, as in the vocals are fine for the most part but some words or some syllables are too loud or too quiet. We have 2 solutions for this: volume automation and compression. At a macro level, volume automation is the best option. This means that you can draw in a change in volume when the song gets to a certain section. You simply click the automation icon on the channel, choose volume, and click on the line to create a point. Then go to the section you want to be louder or quieter and adjust the volume. Now you can see the fader move on its own while it's playing. At a micro level, you can still use volume automation, but that will probably get tedious. That's where the compressor comes in handy. A compressor will take those peaks and valleys and squash them together for a more consistent volume. You can actually see how dynamic a sound is by looking at the volume meter. Check out this hi-hat and clap loop, for example. This volume meter is moving around quite a bit, which means it's a fairly dynamic sound. You can also see it in the waveform that some of these bits are louder than others. If you compare it to the kick, you can see that it peaks at the same place. This means it's a stable sound. You can also see this in the waveforms that they are exactly the same, which makes sense since it's the exact same clip copied and pasted. A dynamic sound is not bad or good, neither is a stable one. Certain sounds are by nature just more or less dynamic, and it's up to you what you want it to be. But if it's causing an issue in the mix for you, you can use a compressor to make it less dynamic. Go to the channel, click the icon to open the bottom panel, and add the effect compressor. I will drop the attack and release to make it react super fast. I will take the ratio all the way up to 100% so we can really hear what we're doing. Then I'll take the threshold all the way up. Now I will listen and bring it down until this red line, which is showing the gain reduction, starts dipping down like this. So essentially what this is doing is pushing the peaks down so that they're more quiet and closer to the valleys. What we want to do now is bring up everything to make it as loud as before. The peak value here doesn't actually tell us the perceived loudness. In other words, how loud something sounds. To check the perceived loudness, the best thing you can do is use your ears. But you can get a close approximation by using RMS, which measures an average loudness instead of a peak. Switch to RMS by right-clicking on a channel. Then go to Volume Meter and choose RMS. It's showing RMS on all channels now, by the way. I will disable the compressor and see how loud it is. Remember to reset it. It's at -16.9. And now I'll enable the compressor and increase the output until it matches the value. There we go. Now, if I let it play and turn it on and off, it should sound like a similar loudness, and we're not getting tricked that something sounds better because it's louder. This is called level matching, and it's very important to do this when you're dealing with any effect that is changing the volume. It's also important because the volume level can change how an effect reacts to the sound. So if you have a big effects chain and you want to change it somewhere in the middle, that could potentially ruin your entire chain. But not if you make sure to match the levels. Let's go back to peak and check that it's not peaking too loud. Okay, we're good. Now that we have balanced the levels, let's check the master channel so we're not too loud. We're under -3 decibels, so we're good to go. But I think there's an unnecessary bass buildup that we can handle to give us even more headroom. Bass frequencies have a lot more energy than higher frequencies. So with multiple layers of bass, there will be a lot of buildup in volume. The bass heavy channels in this beat are the kick and the 808 bass, and they hit at the same time here. We can use automation to bring down the 808 while the kick is playing. So I will click the automation icon, choose volume, and add a fade from where the kick starts to where it ends. And let's do that over here as well. Let's check the master now. It sounds just as good, but we have cleared up a lot more headroom. We leave headroom in the mix so we can make it louder on the master, and this is one aspect of what's called mastering. Mastering is so much more than just making it louder, but if all you want to do is make it louder on your own, I'll show you how to do that using Soundation. On the master channel, add an effect called limiter. A limiter is a lot like a compressor, but its purpose is not to let anything above the threshold, and therefore you can avoid clipping. Leaving the threshold at default is fine in some cases, but when platforms encode your file to a different format, it might start clipping. Therefore, it's usually recommended to set the threshold so that it peaks at -1 decibel. And Spotify, for example, recommends -2 decibels, which you can go with if you want to be extra safe. Now you can increase the gain to make it louder. Make sure you do this during the loudest section of your song. Be careful though, if you add too much gain, it will start sounding broken. You can also check the RMS to get a gauge of the perceived loudness. There is no magic target for RMS, but somewhere around -8 decibels is a pretty common RMS loudness for a master. Now let's go back and check the peak value. I want it to peak at -1, so I can actually bring up the gain a bit more. A little bit more. Now it's hitting -1 and sounds good to me. Something else you might not know is that most platforms like Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Music, YouTube, etc. all normalize your audio, which means that if your volume is way too loud, they're just going to turn it back down again. So it would be a shame if you pushed up your volume to where it sounds bad just to have them turn it back down again. So don't do that. I'll now export the song and see how these platforms will adjust the volume of my track. There's a free tool for this. It's called Loudness Penalty, and it's a website where you can upload your songs to check the loudness and how much different platforms will turn up or down the volume of your song. I'll leave a link in the description. Here you can see that my track will be turned down at least 1.6 decibels on all these platforms. In my opinion, I think the mix should be loud enough to where it gets turned down a few decibels, so I'm happy with this. And now we're done. We've balanced the mix, we've left plenty of headroom so that the master doesn't clip, and we have brought up the loudness on the master to make it loud enough for most platforms without sacrificing the sound quality. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment, like and subscribe while you're at it, and we'll see you in the next video.